at 12:05 p.m. I told my wife, "I'm not feeling well. I'm not sure what it is." Then I looked at the screen on my right and realized that I was already dead. There was already a flat line. And that was the last thing I experienced consciously.
Mr. Riese, you've written a very thought-provoking but also entertaining book with the title Dying and Returning to Life. It is a travel report, so to speak, with the following entry. I died on the 15th of October 2012. It was 12:05 p.m. to be exact. Would you tell us again how it came to that and what you experienced on this day?
Well, let me elaborate how it actually came to the whole situation that happened to me. I went for a walk with my wife. I came back and suddenly started having physical complaints in my chest. However, I saw it as shortness of breath coming from the lungs, because I've got this histamine intolerance. I drank a glass of wine and I thought I was having something like an asthmatic shock in my lungs. Eventually, all intolerances collectively turned into asthma. That was my concern, and I thought I should really see a lung doctor. I didn't get better, and I wasn't even sure if I could breathe in and out properly. And over the period of the whole weekend, these physical complaints wouldn't stop at all. On Monday, I had a massage appointment and I could only walk as far as 100 meters at a time because I went to the massage studio on foot. I suffered from extreme shortness of breath, and on Tuesday evening I went to the massage salon again. After the massage, I wasn't feeling well at all, and then a friend of mine called me who was a heart surgeon and he wanted to arrange a meetup. He then asked, "How are you?" Well, generally quite good, but I think I've got an asthmatic shock in my lungs. From his perplexed reaction, I gathered that something like that might not even exist. And then he said, "Would you describe the symptoms to me?" And I described all the things that happened and the shortness of breath, and he said, "This sounds more like it could be the coronary artery." And I went to see him in hospital that same evening. He then arranged everything, and the next morning I was wheeled to the cardiac catheter lab. They just examined me briefly, threw their hands up in horror and told me, "We'll have to operate on you immediately." Then I thought, oh dear, but at that time I still had this breakfast sweet in me, meaning this tranquilizer that calmed me down. So I said, "Okay, let's do it." My wife wasn't there yet. She came at around 9 a.m. And at the time, she was 6 months pregnant. And of course, in her condition, I didn't want to tell her much about a bypass operation. But I said, "They'll have to perform a surgery. It's just something small. The doctors will manage that with no effort." Well, something along those lines, like it was one of those standard surgeries. Then we were talking about the other patients in the room, then about our child that was about to be born soon. And at 12:05 p.m. I told my wife, "I'm not feeling well. I'm not sure what it is." Then I looked at the screen on my right and realized that I was already dead. There was already a flat line, and that was the last thing I experienced consciously, and then fell over, and at 12:25 they brought me back to life again. Reanimation. I then looked up and 20 or 15 to 20 people were standing around me. It was the doctors who'd brought me back to life again. These were the things I experienced consciously. He's going to make it, and then, "Come on, love." And then I was slapped by a nurse. She was shaking me, and then I was amongst the living again. Then they brought me to the catheter lab. There they applied a stent, and then I was sent to the intensive care ward. That was the whole technical process for now. That happened to me in hospital.
That was your experience?
Yes.
And what did you experience during the time you were dead?
It was a very strange experience for me. At first, I didn't know at all what was happening to me. It wasn't like now let's lie down to die. It was more like a bang and I was gone. I didn't experience the usual thing either, the things I read about afterwards. I informed myself about near-death experiences later on. I didn't see myself lying there. I didn't see any light I was moving towards either. But I found myself in a universe. I don't know whether I should call it our universe or a different one. Well, I felt the same way you would feel when watching a film about universes and galaxies. And somehow, I had the feeling as if I was merged with it, as if I could hug universes. I was really huge too. My name is Riese too, meaning giant in English. But that's just a coincidence. I was able to minimize everything. I was able to focus on everything. I was like all-powerful, as if I could swim through it and make myself really small. Then I saw people again. I could empathize with these people and think in the same way those people were thinking. I could also go back into myself, and it wasn't like a period of time that was passing either. The things I tell you in sequence now, all these things happened simultaneously according to my current memory. And it was an incredibly wonderful feeling. It was strange. It was peaceful. In this space, I didn't really hear anything except for the things I noticed. Like the things I just told you about. Like empathizing with people. Somehow, this universe felt like a bubble that was pumping. As if the universe was alive and contracting again. And then I had the feeling that eternity would be at the edge of the universe, and from there I could see hazy figures, and I heard sounds I can't describe anymore. But in my memory, they were just wonderful. I could never reproduce these sounds or say or compare them with music that is known. They were just sounds I could hear.
Did you have any other emotions during your experience? Oftentimes, people describe this feeling of safety, or that they have the feeling they are immersed by this omniscience. What was it like for you?
I've got to say that I don't know. I wrote it down immediately after I was reanimated again. I realized that my memories were detracted from me. Everything was sucked out of my body. I wanted to hold on to them. And I had my iPhone with me and immediately typed in all the memories I still had. I had an incredible understanding of who I was. It wasn't as if I received a lot of knowledge all of a sudden. It was just like everything was in there. I had an understanding of all the things that were around me. I knew why all these things existed the way they were. I actually had unlimited knowledge. I would have liked to take all these things with me, but now, in this very moment, nothing's left anymore. Well, it's like a snippet, but it's not like I could realistically retrace it again. All the things I felt there were multidimensional. Also, it's incredibly difficult to describe it because I can't relate to it properly anymore. But it was a very nice feeling. I felt very comfortable. As far as I remember, I didn't know if I would stay there. But right after the experience, I couldn't remember either whether I was thinking about it or whether I felt that I wanted to go back there again. I mean, I never had this conflict. I just happened to be back all of a sudden. It wasn't like somebody placed me before a decision or that somebody sent me back. I'm just talking about these things like somebody sending me back, because these are things that are mentioned in reports on near-death experiences, and these weren't things I had experienced.
When you analyzed your experiences afterwards, what were your conclusions?
I had a huge question, namely, how dead was I actually? And in retrospect, I've got to say that there are different grades of death, and that's something I've analyzed in great detail. If somebody's in a coma, are they dead? Or can they have a near-death experience at all? Or do we have to speak about a residual current energy that is working in the brain? And is it wishful thinking, or are they wishful effects that are given off? In my case, It was that. In my case, not even the defibrillator helped anymore, because it only works for ventricular fibrillation. In my case, it was a complete cardiac arrest. My heart completely stopped. After 10 seconds, my cerebrum, my cerebellum, my brainstream, and my cerebral cortex were not functioning anymore. There was nothing working anymore. And here, we can't speak of hallucinations anymore because nothing living could be measured anymore. I was truly dead during the time I had those experiences. And I felt like I wasn't dead, but that there was a body. Well, there's this part of me where I knew that my consciousness wasn't gone, and as mentioned before, in retrospect, I was interested in the question, when is a person actually dead? Especially during the removal of organs, it is important to determine that, and it is verified that it is impossible to determine at what point somebody is dead. This is a fact. Of course, you can say somebody is dead when they decompose, when cell death occurs. Then the person is actually dead and does not return because consciousness doesn't know where it can dock onto now, if it wanted to come back. But of course, this is a very important aspect for the removal of organs, for the donation of organs. When is somebody dead? And when can I remove organs? At the state of putrefaction, this doesn't work anymore. This means in one way or another, the cells have to exhibit a certain liveliness. But is a person still alive then too? With me, it was the case. In any other hospital, I might have been, I don't know. I also didn't ask later on if I'd already been in a cooling chamber or if they had already intended to use me as an organ donor. If it hadn't been written everywhere that I was a friend of this heart surgeon, and so they had made some extra effort again, and so I'm looking at this whole thing rather favorably because a reanimation of 20 minutes is usually the maximum in hospitals. They usually don't continue after that.
At one point in your first book you write, I haven't returned to fulfill a certain task or mission. At least I don't know of any mission. Nevertheless, in how far have these experiences changed your life?
Well, they've changed quite a bit. Firstly, from a very pragmatic standpoint, in my case, a lot more things had occurred. I had a heart attack before my friend sent me to hospital that I hadn't even noticed. It must have happened sometime in the years before, and this heart attack had blocked my main coronary artery, the LAD. It's the main artery of the anterior wall of the heart that was blocked on a length of 5 centimeters. What I mean is, if your artery is blocked, you have a heart attack. Either you die or a stent is applied, and in my case, collateral arteries developed around this stenosis. This is called arteriogenesis. Currently, many universities are trying very hard to find a therapy in order to stimulate the development of arteriogenesis artificially. The issue is that if you have a heart attack and an artery is blocked, you can't treat this problem fast enough, so that these arteries, these new collateral arteries, are developed fast enough. These arteries are extremely thin arteries, and in my case, that must have happened at some time. Today, we don't know when it happened, maybe in a harmonious way. Well, maybe a blocked artery was developed due to sporty overpressure.
You write that you frequently had training periods.
Yes.
When you were very sporty, and maybe that...
Yes. In my book, I like to mention that I'm completely damaged, physically speaking, or was. Well, it was like that. I suffered from shifting vertebrae, and there is this one vertebra called T2. It's the 5th vertebra from the top. If this vertebra shifts, it touches a nerve. It's the same nerve that is touched during a heart attack. That means the symptoms are the same. The left arm feels numb, you have pains in your shoulder, in your jaws, in your back, and you have a fear of dying, and you're overcome by cold perspiration. So it was like having a heart attack. They diagnosed this for the first time more than 20 years ago, and after an odyssey of seeing cardiologists and other doctors, an orthopedist diagnosed that this vertebra shifts, and that it triggers these symptoms. It could be treated by massages, but when you just experience these symptoms and you have to wait for a massage appointment, well, I then treated it with push-ups over and over again. And these push-ups were probably part of these sport activities. And one time, it wasn't the vertebra, but actually a heart attack, where I wouldn't really say that I treated this with push-ups. Well, it was a balancing act. That was probably a permanent balancing act with death, where I played with death without knowing it. And to return to the task, your question, it became my mission to make the things that happen in the heart, this arteriogenesis, more known, because it's a very interesting story. It's not something that happens over a period of years, but this arteriogenesis happens over a period of 3 weeks. So it's a very short period of time. That's why I advise everyone, no matter whether they are a heart patient or not, to move a lot. Exercise has always been advised, as all doctors say, move, move, move. But I've analyzed in great detail why exercise is so important for our body. Oftentimes, you see those elderly men running around with their headbands on. And you can believe me, if you examine those elderly men, everything would be calcified. But they won't die from it because new arteries have developed around these calcifications. This has been proven and it's fascinating. That's why, even if it looks desperate, it's important to move a lot. And if you can't move a lot, just go for walks because even this helps to support the development of arteriogenesis. It's a heightened thrust of blood that goes to the heart due to physical activities. And if there's arteries that are already calcified and the thrust of blood can't flow off properly, the body looks for a different path and builds up these very thin arteries that are there anyway. They are then expanded so the blood can go through via the collateral arteries built by arteriogenesis.
So, to sum up, the outcome of your experience was, I want to change my life. I'll have to exercise more, and now it's time to run the Vienna Marathon.
Yes, I've trained 2 years for it. Well, regularly and without much glee, I've got to say, I hate running. But I will run until I die because it keeps me alive. I've also written into my book that it is the most unpleasant way of transportation for me. In the past, I went to the tobacconist by car, and today I run everywhere, unless the distance is more than 3 kilometers. Then I just walk, and for my training, I do that anyway.
What does a typical training of yours look like?
It's horrible. At first I need about 2 hours of a run-up distance so I can perform properly, but I'm still suffering due to the blocked artery. You've got to imagine these collaterals are just 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 100 of a normal artery, and all the blood flows has to go through them, and I pump them up by doing this pre-run. So it increases the blood flow through the arteries. At the beginning, it was like proper torture. And you know how. Let me describe my first day of training. I thought, well, let's just train for a marathon. Let's start with 5 kilometers. Because as an athlete, I was always quite realistic. I thought, let's not overdo it. I then put on nice training clothes, did my stretches and started running. And I just got as far as 100 meters and collapsed because I had an angina pectoris attack in my heart. So I immediately stopped and panicked, and I thought, I'll never go running again. But this was just for a short moment because I'd planned to go for a run, and that was what I wanted to do, but I thought, it's not working that way. So I just did 100 meters, which was a relatively pathetic distance. Our child had just been born at the time, and since we had to go for walks with the pushchair, I asked my wife, come on, let's go for a walk with the kid in our sweatsuits, and let's try to extend the route more and more while we're walking. Let's also try to go faster and faster. It would be nice if you joined me. And of course, she joined me. And so I got to know new routes that were partially 10 or 15 kilometers long, and sometimes it took us the whole day. But my body was constantly moving and got used to performing again. One might think that you perform well if you're out and about the whole day, but there's quite a disparity, speaking from a sporty standpoint. It all went well. I didn't have another attack for the next 6 to 7 months either. I don't remember for how long we did that, but we just brought tension into our bodies by going for walks. And then I wanted to go running again for the first time. Well, it was the same scenario. The first time I went for a run again, I just got as far as 100 meters and broke down again. And I said, it's not working at all. What's happening inside me? But then I didn't give up. I didn't want to give up now, and I didn't want to keep running because then I probably wouldn't have crawled back into my trainers. And then I just waited until this attack was over, and then I walked on, and I eventually realized, there's no problem, I'm well again, and then I continued my run. Soon, I noticed that this pressure in my heart was building up again, and eventually I understood what was happening there. So I'll have to dose this pressure, the pressure hammering against my heart, meaning I was playing with this angina pectoris, so I expected it to come and I perceived it as something positive because I thought, even if it's painful, I'm pumping up my arteries. That was exactly the thing I had in my head, and I just thought, just run until it hurts because the heart will regenerate itself then. Whether this was medically right or wrong, well, I didn't really care about this at the time, I just wanted to believe that would happen. I just wanted it to be that way and continue training like that. I also didn't dare confide into my doctor regarding this, not even my friend. I only did that afterwards when I knew that it actually worked. When I was examined a few months after I had started the training, they found that under normal conditions, like a state of rest, I didn't have any circulatory disturbances in my heart anymore. And before, the circulatory disturbances had been quite bad. And then I realized that I really supported this arteriogenesis and all the things around it by moving, and because I was doing that, the heart managed to repair itself. And I've still got this problem today. I've still got a blocked coronary artery and can't just start running. When I run across a road because there's a lot of traffic or whatever, I'm completely out of breath when I get to the other side of the road. But if I walk 2 kilometers quite fast and start running afterwards, then I've got this rhythm that doesn't affect all these things. Today, I don't get into this state of suffering from angina pectoris anymore, that the pains are so unbearable that I have to stop. Today, I've got more the problem that my muscles, because they don't get enough oxygen as they were used to, especially the big muscles, I've got the problem that lactates develop there, and this is extremely painful. Because at a certain point, we need to burn oxygen, and if there isn't enough oxygen in the muscles, they briefly burn without oxygen, but not completely. The remains get stuck in the muscles, and that is quite painful. Sometimes I run and don't really feel my legs anymore. Well, these are the problems I have, so it's not like a normal training that you'd imagine. That's why there's no training plan I could download from the internet. How does a former dead heart patient have to run so he'll make a whole marathon? That's why I'll have to find out myself. Also, how fast can I run? All those things were quite tricky. Of course, professionals told me to bring a pulse watch and so on and so forth. I did without all those things. I just said, none of these things work. The pulse watch won't be able to tell me if there's a problem with my heart. I can only listen to myself. I can run and listen and feel what's happening in my body. Well, that was also very important to me. Many people listen to music when they go for a run, but I don't do any of these things. Well, I just start running, and from the first moment on, I listen to my body. When does it tell me to stop? When does it tell me to slow down? When does it tell me you can run faster again? If there are pains, are they purely muscle pains in my legs, pains from the fatigue, or could it also come from the heart? Because sometimes there is an exchange, then I can't really tell the difference.
Observations, right?
Yes, exactly.
I'd like to get back to the topic of death again. You've lost your fear of death, but at one point in your first book you write, "If there's one thing I don't like, it is having to die so many times. Whenever I feel unwell, I feel death. Dying constantly is annoying." So, what's your relationship to death now? On the one hand, it is something that shouldn't be tabooed, but on the other hand, it's also not desirable.
It's certainly not a taboo for me. Well, I speak to everybody about it who wants to hear it, or even doesn't want to hear it, because it's a very important issue. The fear that's in yourself, I used to say, I'm not scared anymore. Well, that was still valid when I was writing my book. At the time, I wasn't scared, but fortunately, I found this fear again when my daughter said "Daddy" to me for the first time. Then I got scared that I wouldn't hear this often enough anymore, and thus my fear came back, and also my zest for life. And I only realized this afterwards while writing my book, Dying and Returning to Life. And this zest of life was missing. I just got aware of it later. This zest of life and joy of life, a part of this has also to do with taking care of yourself, because death is still around. I'm not afraid of dying as such, but I eventually feel the need to enjoy all those moments with my daughter, wife and son. I'd like to accompany their lives. And it's not about the fear of death, and it's not the fear that something might happen, but it's about not being scared of this fear. There are things that should be lived somehow too. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but they diagnosed that I was diabetic. And then I got prescribed strong diabetes tablets. And sometimes when I look at them, my sugar levels drop to a certain point, and once I experienced this hypoglycemia, and it was the same as having drunk 2 glasses of champagne. So everything felt very distorted and dim, and that was the same feeling when I died. Well, some people experience a very painful death, other people a very soft one. And mine was very strange. I was looking at my wife and I felt dizzy, or rather distorted. As mentioned before, it was like having drunk 2 or 3 glasses of champagne. And then I just fell over. And in retrospect, that was the worst part, because that form of death was way too easy. And if you've got such hypoglycemia, it's the same feeling. Then you've got the feeling, I'm about to say goodbye, done. Or you've got the feeling of a soft pinch or something similar. For other people, a feeling like that might trigger a yes, I should see a doctor again soon. But for me, it was something familiar. It was the same feeling I had when I was dying.
One chapter of your book has the title, The 6 Deadly Sins, and you wrote, I know them all, because I've sinned. So what should one avoid according to your experiences? What are the most important messages that you want to entrust to us due to your experiences?
Well, the main message is, the beauty of it is that I'm not just talking about it, but that I actually experienced it. I used to smoke 70 cigarettes per day, and I enjoyed smoking. I liked doing that, and when I didn't manage smoking 70 cigarettes per day, I stayed up longer at night to reach my daily fix. And one time, it happened almost 12 years ago, 8 years before I had my heart attack, I quit smoking, but it was more of a key experience. I used to have this snow-white ashtray with a logo of a cigar, and I had stubbed out a cigarillo against the ashtray while talking on the phone, and at the end of the phone call, I took a sip of coffee and looked at the ashtray. And what I saw was a horrible sight. I saw this snow-white alabaster-colored ashtray, and at the same time I associated this ashtray with my lungs, and then this stubbed-out cigarillo. You don't stub out a cigarillo, you actually just let it extinguish by itself. But in the stressful situation of the phone call, I just stubbed it out against the ashtray. And there was this brown broth in there, and it was flowing around in the ashtray, and so I found myself thinking, so that's it, I'll quit smoking. And that was truly my last cigarette. And in my book, I wrote in great detail what effect smoking has on the body. And the effect it had on me was that I eventually had a heart attack I never felt, an artery that is still blocked, and a cardiac death of 20 minutes. And who knows what else? Something that, thank God, I might have already worked off. But smoking cigarettes is one of the worst things you can do regarding cardiovascular disorders.
So the deadly sin is not to move.
Yes, it's not to move. That's why I write, even if you hate it, and I really hate running and walking. I'm also not one of those people who feel endorphins being released while moving. Well, when I run, I'm way too focused on fighting with myself in order to handle everything inside of focusing on this feeling of happiness many runners talk about. But I know what movement does for the body and what difference it makes. Most people actually really experience this feeling of happiness. Worries are reduced, and it's good for the psyche's well-being if you suffer from depression. It's wonderful for these things. You can help the doctors and psychologists so much just by moving. You just go to the doctor's appointment with a different feeling because during the time of movement, the body is helping itself by what it releases. It's like that. When I'm scared, you might have heard the saying, "This person died from his or her own fear." It might sound ridiculous, but it's actually true. It's not just the fear this person died from. Fear is a flight reflex that happens in our bodies. And the moment I feel scared, the adrenaline gland releases adrenaline. It's a hormone that floods the body. And then it happens that people calm themselves down after a fear or panic attack. Come on, it's not so bad, and so on and so forth. They feel better afterwards. They've calmed themselves down, but this is a fatal misbelief. Instead, they should have put on their tracksuit and go for a run right after, because otherwise the adrenaline stays in the body and starts to poison the body. Every flight reflex that is put into action, meaning if you panic and go for a run, you decompose the adrenaline in your body. And when you try handling a panic attack on a sofa and you manage handling it there, the adrenaline is not decomposed. The adrenaline stays in the body and poisons it. And you can only get the adrenaline out of your body if you go outside and go for a run. That's also referring to your question, exercise and deadly sin. So when I don't move, it's actually a deadly sin. And when I suffer from fears and depression, then fears become my death because at one point it poisons me. Many people suffer from fears, especially people who've made similar experiences as me. Let's ignore cardiac death for a minute because it's eventually the premium class, so to speak. But if we think of just working off a heart attack, this isn't going to work. They release me from hospital. The doctors release me from a therapy. I don't have a psychologist by my side who will prepare me for what's going to happen. Then I get home. They look at me and tell me, "Oh, you look good." Well, of course, they've applied a stent and the patient's face, that used to look pale and grey to others before the heart attack, is well supplied with blood all of a sudden. So that person looks a lot better than before the heart attack, and thus he or she isn't seen as a sick person by his or her family and friends. Unfortunately, what's more is that people don't like conversing with a heart attack patient because he or she is like a greeting from death, and death isn't the right topic for a party or a relaxed evening. So now we've got the heart patient who's sitting all by herself or himself, and there are three different types. There's the one who bottles everything up and doesn't want to bother anyone. This type would say, "Ah, well, no worries, everything's okay." Then there's the second type who's overly funny all of a sudden. He or she thinks they're very entertaining and make fun of everything. And the third type reacts very boyish and cheeky towards his or her surroundings. But all these three types share one thing: they are scared. They're extremely scared that something like a heart attack will happen again. And that's also the reason why they're too scared to move, which leads us to the topic of movement or exercise again. They say, "I'd rather not move because, well, this was the way 15 or 20 years ago when doctors said, rest, rest, rest. That's the most important thing." And what was completely wrong? Today we know that exercise is the most important thing. If you're too scared to exercise by yourself, join a heart training group. These groups are offered everywhere. Just ask your health insurance or your GP or check the internet. Heart training groups are offered everywhere, and that's where you should start with. And then it doesn't take long to be reintegrated to life. And you should also bother your surroundings a bit. You should tell them about your heart attack, because the fear that occurs is a problem, as well as being the brain won't manage to see the heart attack as something that happened in the past. For most people, it's something that is still extremely present. Even if years have passed, the heart attack is still present and isn't stored as something in the past. However, you can help the brain by saying, "I had this heart attack," and just by speaking in the past tense, it helps the brain to store this event, and it helps the psyche not to retrieve it that often. It's a bit complex, but this is what I talk and write about. How can I overcome my fear without having to take heavy medication? And how can I help myself by using various small tricks?
Mr. Riese, I wish you all the best. Thank you very much for this interview.
You're very welcome.